This Simic Nexus deck that Nathaniel is playing is one that we've seen quite a bit this weekend, or something very similar. A lot of banned versions, all revolving around Wilderness Reclamation that try to cast Nexus of Fate over and over again, and really showing off the power of the card.
Yeah, and the big innovation here from the Simic side are 4 main deck copies of Frilled Mystic.
Right.
It's a way to win the game once you're taking a bunch of turns in a row. It's a counterspell that works around Negate, which is a very popular counterspell people are playing in their main decks. And another big innovation for this list, we saw a list earlier in coverage that had 4 main deck copies of Search for Escanta, this down to 3, but still a lot of copies of that card.
Right, and it's an integral part to the strategy. Looks like he has 2 copies here in his opening hand, which is great news for Nathaniel, because this Thought Erasure from Esper Control is usually a very strong card, but with that redundant copy, he's going to be forced basically here to take Frilled Mystic, when normally he would love to strip Nathaniel of that Search for Escanta. But if Abraham Stein actually has Mortify in hand, he could go for that Search for Escanta, use Mortify on the following one.
Yeah, we'll find out kind of the nature of Stein's hand here in a moment. If you don't have an answer to the Search for Escanta, there's no point in fighting over the second copy. But if you can answer it, maybe Frilled Mystic becomes the choice.
Yeah, and then we have 2 copies in hand of Root Snare. Not really one you want to see from the Simic Nexus side of things against Esper Control. Only one Lear Dawnbringer as the main deck threat.
Yep. So we'll find out here, and Stein with the answer.
Yeah, Mortify taking care of the second Search for Escanta. Had all the answers so far. It's looking really good for Abe.
Yep. I mean, you got out of the woods there. The Search for Escanta is the easiest way to pull away in a matchup like Esper Control. Now, without that, Monsees is kind of stranded here with a couple of Root Snares that don't do very much. Going to have to find another copy of Search for Escanta. Chemist's Insight, something to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, 5th land, though, for Abraham Stein on turn 5. Going to cast that powerful Teferi. And without an untapped land, no Frilled Mystic as a protection here. And Teferi really hammering home just how strong it can be against the Simic Nexus deck.
You know, once Stein gets the shields up here, he's going to be able to untap all of his mana, play with a lot of counterspells and Mortify available, race to the emblem here, and probably close this game out very quickly.
Yeah, Swamp here for Abraham Stein is 6th land. He's going to float 4 with the trigger of Teferi on the stack, cast Chemist's Insight, looking for some more counterspells, I suppose. Not really a whole lot in his deck that interacts with Nathaniel Moses other than counterspells at this point, but very far ahead nonetheless. Chemist's Insight from Nathaniel in response to the one from Abraham Stein. It's going to give him a little more to work with, but doesn't present any pressure on his turn, just passes.
And something that's very helpful here for Stein, something that's been absent in some of the other Esper matchups that we've had, is the instant speed card drawing. You need to pull ahead on the turns where you leave up all your mana to counterspell, the opponent doesn't present anything, you need to start generating extra cards. A lot of the Esper decks we've been watching over the weekend have kind of been sitting on their hands. That gives the Nexus decks time to set up multiple spells in one turn, draw a bunch of cards of their own. Stein doing a very good job of using all of his mana every single turn while pulling ahead.
Right, and that's really important to do against a deck that operates primarily at instant speed like the Simic Nexus deck. And here we're seeing Abraham Stein passing the turn, not really going to focus on trying to beat the card draw aspects of the Simic Nexus deck, instead focusing on beating things like Wilderness Reclamation and Nexus of Fate.
Yeah, I mean, the ball is in Monsees' court to try to do something here, because left unchecked here, Stein is going to run away with this game with the Teferi emblem. So there's no pressure for Stein to do anything. Just draw cards, pull ahead, leave up all your mana, and force Monsees to play something that matters.
Yeah, and one of the easiest ways for any player to interact with the Planeswalker is through the combat step, right? And in this juncture, even if Monsees does play something like Frilled Mystic on the incept to try to pressure that Teferi a little bit to protect from the ultimate, Abraham Stein's hand is probably just full of removal spells. Yeah,
you can't imagine that a 3/3 is good here in terms of a way to pressure Teferi.
Yeah, so he's going to need one of his few copies of Blink of an Eye to be able to get that Teferi off the battlefield, and it looks like he has one at the ready. And alongside that Frilled Mystic, he can potentially win this counter war, but Abe has so much mana available and so many cards in hand.
Yeah, and even if you won this battle, I mean, how much is this really getting you? It still doesn't answer the long-term problem of how is Monsees going to get any traction in this game.
Yeah, and obviously casting the gate off that 2 floating mana that was generated from the Teferi untap ability. Looks like Abraham Stein wins the fight here, but Nathaniel Moses is going to have 1 turn here to work on that Teferi. If he can't find it, it's going to be bad news.
Because if Monsees needs to have a bunch of mana available to be able to pressure Stein at all to be able to cobble together multiple spells in one turn. And once the Teferi emblem starts working overtime on Monsees' lands, there's no hope of being able to get to multiple spells in one turn.
Right. Wilderness Reclamation here, the play for Nathaniel Moses. That's a good start to the turn, but no follow-up here, no end of turn, Nexus of Fate. And there's an emblem from Abraham Stein. That's going to do some heavy lifting here over the next few turns.
Yeah. First order of business here, I think, would be to get the Wilderness Reclamation off the battlefield.
Absolutely.
From there, you start taxing the lands. Unclear how much proactive stuff Stein has. His deck is so reactive that he may need to wait for Monsees to play something for him to be able to cast some sort of spell, but any sort of card drawing or discard spell here plays very well.
Right. A really good card here would be Chemist's Insight, threatening up to 4 cards drawn, exiling the Wilderness Reclamation and 3 lands. But with this Teferi emblem on the battlefield, it looks like he does have the Chemist's Insight in hand. It's going to be interesting to see if Monsees can get out of this one. And a Precognitive Perception from Abraham Stein is going to draw him 3 cards, exiling 3 permanents, and that's going to take out that Wilderness Reclamation and 2 lands. And we'll see if Monsees can survive with all these permanents getting eaten up.
Yeah, this is one of the best ways to manage a time walk is to Armageddon your opponent. Then there's not that much to be done with the turn.
Yeah, and a Mortify as the follow-up to the Precognitive Perception is going to take out the Wilderness Reclamation. And even though Nathaniel Monsees is going to get an extra turn, he's down to 2 cards in hand. No Wilderness Reclamation left after the Mortify. But he does get 2 turns in a row, so let's see if he can get something done.
I'm not optimistic. We will see.
But I am a frilled mystic. Nathaniel here in his first turn of extra turns needs a Wilderness Reclamation to get the ball rolling. And he has it, and it looks like he also has a Nexus of Fate in hand. This could be the start of something beautiful, Patrick.
Again, I'm not optimistic, but you're right. It's okay. Now we're up to access to 12 mana through the turn.
This is not okay. Plays the second copy of Wilderness Reclamation, moves to instep, floats 8 mana, uses 7 of it to cast Nexus of Fate. He is out of extra turns except for the one he just generated, so if he doesn't do anything with his 3 mana, he's just going to be moving to his next turn, and he needs something big. He needs some sort of engine to go along with all this extra mana.
Yeah, when I'm watching the Simic Nexus deck in action especially, the engine is really hubbed around Azcanta transforming.
Right.
Then it becomes very easy. In the absence of that, this deck doesn't really do a ton with the extra turns. It has some card drawing, but it's really leaning on Azcanta.
Right. And against this Esper Control deck here, you see him fighting through a Teferi emblem. He lost his Wilderness Reclamation and multiple lands during the previous instep, but is really starting to look like he's clawing back here. Growth Spiral, the cast off the extra mana, but is going to pass the turn with 5 useless mana up. Let's see if Stein can clear this battlefield of relevant permanents. Teferi emblem trigger here off the draw step. Abe contemplating what to knock out.
A little bit of a sweat there from Stein. I mean, Monsees got the ball rolling a little bit here, but really low odds of him being able to go all the way off there from that low of a base and without Azcanta.
Chooses with that Teferi emblem to knock out one of the remaining Wilderness Reclamations. Land for turn is Isolated Chapel, followed up with a Teferi. And Frilled Mystic, the play from Nathaniel Monsees, but an Absorb there to counter that. And we have a Teferi with a Teferi emblem going. This is exactly where you want to be as an Esper Control pilot. The worst has happened, and you survived it.
It's a combo, you see, because the Teferi draws a card, and your emblem triggers off of that event occurring. And it already sort of implies that you're really far ahead. So, you see how that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, the Hydroid Krasis not at its best when it's just a 2-2. Gets knocked off here nonetheless by Vraska's Contempt. And Nathaniel's seen enough. He's going to pack it in. All his Wilderness Reclamation's gone.
Great concession.
Yeah.
Wasn't necessarily, could have played that out for a couple more turns. But, writing's on the wall. Nothing to be done there. Love a good concession.
Yeah, and we're going to take a look at both players' sideboards here. Nathaniel Monsees is going to be on the play for game 2. Let's start with him. He's got 4 copies in the gate. 3 Crushing Canopy, 3 Palaka Worm, 2 Murmuring Mystic, 1 The Immortal Sun, 1 Nezahal the Primal Tide, and 1 River's Rebuke. That's a nice one. Patrick, if you're in the Simic Nexus seat, how do you sideboard for this matchup?
I like the negates, and I would bring in the Immortal Sun as well.
Yeah,
call it a day.
Yeah, Immortal Sun is a pretty nice card at shutting off Teferi, the primary win condition of the Esper control deck. How are your feelings on the Murmuring Mystic? If you think they're going to be siding out a bunch of the removal, maybe siding in Thief of Sanity, maybe Murmuring Mystic has some legs.
Maybe. I don't. The problem is that there's just not a whole lot to really cut here. You can get away from your copies of a Root Snare pretty easily.
Sure.
Past that, everything is kind of engine or card drawing, so I don't want to go too heavy on the sideboarding.
Now, funny story about Nezahal, the Primal Tide. Ross Merriman and I actually played this exact matchup on Versus Live earlier this week, and I didn't draw the Nezahal until I only had about 20 cards left in my deck, and he decked me with my own Nezahal. It's not fair.
It's not. It's not. I will leave that one at home. But the negates...
It's on camera.
I know. I'm saying the Nezahal.
Oh, you would leave it? Okay.
Yeah, the Nezahal.
All right, from the other side of things, Abraham Stein, we got 4 copies of Thief Sanity, 3 Duress, 2 Hostage Taker, 2 Basilica Bellhaunt, 1 Cry of the Cardinarium, a Cast Down, a Lear Dawnbringer, and a Moment of Craving to round out the sideboard. Patrick, if you're in the Esper control seat, what do you do?
It was pretty straightforward stuff. Thief of Sanity and Duress are really strong here. The rest of the sideboard is dedicated basically for creature matchups in various forms. Get away from some of your creature removal, and Thief of Sanity and Duress both high leverage plays.
Now, is Hostage Taker a card that you might want to consider as a means of dealing with the potentially problematic Hydroid Krasis?
I suspect that he does not have 9 cards in his main deck to have that are worth cutting to make space for that. If Hostage Taker is coming in, it's more about Stein having weak cards in his main deck, not an active desire to have Hostage Taker available.
All right. Well, if you want to learn more about Standard and how to sideboard, you can take a gander at the Star City Games newsletter. Highlights from some of the best articles that go up each week, upcoming SCG Tour dates and locations. You can figure out where some invitational qualifiers are near you, as well as Star City Game Nights near you, and you can sign up for free. All you got to do is go to go.starcitygames.com/newsletter, and you can read some little tidbits from the likes of Brian Gottlieb. He was my partner last week in the booth when I was taking Jerry Thompson's place in SCG Baltimore. Great guy, smart guy, and glad to have him as part of the team.
Yep. All sorts of content from StarCityGames.com writers, premium and select side, available in the newsletter. Shows up once a week. Not invasive, free. You're already on the internet.
Yeah.
Reading, stuff that's worse. Go sign up.
I'll tell you what's never in the newsletter. Links to my articles.
Listen, this is your chance. If you got dirty laundry to air out,
I got plenty.
Yeah, this is a good time.
Look, I am constantly told by my wife, my boss, friends, don't do it.
Yeah, but none of them are here right now. It's just me. It's just me and you.
Okay, all right, that's fair.
It sounds
like you bring out the worst in me sometimes.
It does sound. I'm just saying. I'm just trying to enable you to speak your mind here a little bit, because you brought up the newsletter here.
People want deck lists, okay? They want sideboard guides. They don't want to hear me talk about why Nexus of Fate is one of the biggest design mistakes of all time.
It's that's not necessarily true. People come for all sorts of things. If people didn't want to hear, sort of random scattershot opinions now and then, I wouldn't have a job. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
Where would I be? Out there playing, probably. Yeah. Maybe not even that,
It's like both players are getting ready here for Game 2. Let's see who takes it down here. Abraham Stein up a game with his Esper control deck against Nathaniel Monsees' Simic Nexus strategy. Simic Nexus getting a bit of airtime this week on Versus Live with me and Ross Merrim as I ran it through the gauntlet. It took a top 4 with Alantrazi last week in the Classic, but here we go. Both players off to the races. Duress here from Abraham Stein on his turn 1, a shock from the Godless Shrine. He's going to take a look at a hand of Frilled Mystic, Chemist's Insight, Negate, Wilderness Reclamation, Growth Spiral, and an Island. What do you take here, Patrick?
Well, that's going to really depend on Stein's hand. And absent of that information, Growth Spiral sticks out here since Monsees' hand is so expensive and light on mana.
Right, and that could dig him for that land, and if there are 2 lands on top, that pushes him right to a potential turn 3 Wilderness Reclamation into Chemist's Insight, which is one of the most powerful draws that the deck can do.
And and Stein's deck has a lot of discard in it too. So often when you have a lot of discard in your deck and it's close, you want to open on just take the cheapest card that's eligible. So then you can chain your discard spells up the curve against their more expensive stuff.
Right, and with things like Thought Erasure from the Esper control deck on top of those duresses, that's a really great point. Turn 2, Search for Escanta here from Abraham Stein. That's something Nathaniel would love to get online as well. It's a huge part of his deck. Finds the land off the Growth Spiral. Can he find another one off the top? He does. Turn 4, Wilderness Reclamation. He's going to untap. He's going to Chemist's Insight or Frilled Mystic. His deck playing at instant speed. This is a huge turn of events for Nathaniel Monsees.
Time to find out kind of the nature of Stein's hand here. He did take a risk in leaving the Growth Spiral there to open up the Search for Escanta. If his hand's really powerful and can defend himself, that's great. If not, giving Monsees that opening here might prove to be problematic.
Now, this is a really heads-up play by Nathaniel. He actually could have gone for an Inner Chemist's Insight, but wanted to hold up Frilled Mystic as a means of protection. Monsees here moves his Inset, floats 5, casts Chemist's, and then passes the turn. Abraham Stein, no play. Takes a look at the top card, decides to keep it. We'll see if he can come up with an answer for that Wilderness Reclamation, as well as the Frilled Mystic that he knows is hanging out on Nathaniel Monsees' side of things. Another duress here, notably a white border duress. How do you feel about mismatched duresses?
I used to be bothered by that kind of stuff, and now I'm not. Couple reasons. One, it's classist. A lot of people, they just have the cards they have.
That's fair.
They're playing in events. No reason to dog them for having mismatched art. Second, some people like mismatched art. Some people have sentimental attachment to the specific cards that they own.
That's fair.
So I shouldn't, my sensibilities and someone else's sensibilities can be different.
Hey, this is a learning experience. Appreciate that. Duress here is going to strip Nathaniel Monsees of his Crushing Canopy. It could have notably cast that on the Search for Escanta in response, but wants to hold up that Frilled Mystic to make sure that Abe is unable to get his Wilderness Reclamation off the battlefield.
Yeah, Monsees is showing a real commitment here to giving up a little bit of efficiency to make sure that nothing bad happens to the Wilderness Reclamation.
Right, and looks like he has 2 floating here, so he's going to use 2 more to cast a second copy of Chemist's Insight, just continually digging, and this is exactly where you want to be. Wilderness Reclamation generates a ton of extra mana. You want to use that mana to cast things like Chemist's Insight and other card draw spells and really get the ball rolling.
Yeah, particularly against an opponent with Stein, where he's not really going to KO you with one big play. It's just about having good one-for-one exchanges and breaking up your important stuff. If you're just bulk rate drawing a bunch of cards, that's a hard thing for him to keep up with.
Right. Thought Erasure is the play after keeping the card on top with Search for Escanta. A negate from Nathaniel is going to try to protect from the Thought Erasure. He wants that Frilled Mystic to stick around as long as possible. Mortify on the Wilderness Reclamation, but a blink of an eye to protect.
Blink and I doing a lot of work here.
It's so good. People made fun of me for so long for playing Blink of an Eye. Why are you playing that card in your deck? It's negative card economy most of the time. It's like, well, look how much heavy lifting it's doing here. It could have bounced a Frilled Mystic if you wanted to. It protected Wilderness Reclamation from a Mortify. And here, things just going off without a hitch.
And also, people just systemically underrate mobile cards.
Yes.
Like, games of Magic are weird, and having a card that can be 2-mana bounce or 4-mana bounce and draw is really flexible option to have.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Patrick, and I want to emphasize that point because modal cards are particularly strong with stuff like Wilderness Reclamation. Early on, you need your cards to function, have some sort of use, but later in the game, once you have access to just an absurd amount of mana, a modal card that just chains up and gets better as the more mana you have, something like Blink of an Eye goes from mediocre to an all-star when you cast a turn 4 Wilderness Reclamation.
Yeah, it is a little bit inefficient mana-wise, but it's hard to imagine a stage of the game where it doesn't do anything.
Right. Nathaniel Monsees here is threatening to get the city's blessing with his 8th land and 2 permanents. Let's see if Abraham Stein has a response to the Search for Escanta. Notably, the Arch of Vraska is a good way and really in a way that Abe can't interact with to utilize the extra mana from the Wilderness Reclamation. Absorb targeting, Search for Escanta. Frilled Mystic is the fire back, and Nathaniel comes out once again on top in these exchanges.
Yeah, there's something to the, a lot. This matchup, I think, has a lot of nuance to it, but there is a point that you get to that it's 20 mana versus 5.
Yes.
And the person has can spend 20 mana every single turn.
Right.
And at a certain point, it kind of doesn't matter what the other side of the table is up to, because that delta of efficiency and resources is just too vast to overcome.
Right, and we see time and time again throughout Magic's history, control decks decided largely on who misses their land drop first, which emphasizes just how important mana can be in this big back-and-forth card draw battle. And here we see Nathaniel Monsees basically putting in the cheat code with Wilderness Reclamation and completely dominating Abraham Stein after sideboard here in Game 2.
And it's not like Stein has come to the table here with a bad draw. Just go through that graveyard. Multiple copies of Duress, a Mortify, and Absorb. The stuff got cast. It's just Monsees has got kind of too much of a cushion to draw a bunch of cards. That on top of the Wilderness Reclamation is, again, the delta in mana and efficiency is just too vast for Stein to really overcome here.
Yeah, we have a fight here. We have end of turn activating of Arch of Araska. We have a Mortify targeting Search for Escanta. We have Negate targeting Mortify and then Absorb targeting Negate. Abraham Stein is going to come out on top, but it is not even remotely clear whether or not Abraham Stein is still in this game.
Yeah, I mean, getting the Search for Escanta off the battlefield really important here, but the Arch can sort of serve as a proxy for that, as a way of drawing cards when Monsees doesn't have anything else better to do with his mana.
Right, and worst comes to worst, he still has Memorial to Genius. He has so many ways to draw cards. I'm not sure if that was the right target for Mortify. We're going to have to wait and see, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of spots. If you go after Wilderness Reclamation and let Monsees have an unchecked Search for Escanta, that's really bad news too. I suppose the reasoning here is, you still have top decks in theory to manage the Wilderness Reclamation. Once you let Escanta transform, you really aren't drawing to anything to manage that.
Right.
Like I said, I don't think it's much to do about anything here. Monsees' resources here are so just on a completely different plane than Stein's that even if he picks something different, I don't think Stein really gets back into the game by any stretch.
Absolutely. We still have one Wilderness Reclamation willing to go on the stack. We still have an Arch of Araska that needs to be used. A Memorial Genius was popped off there to give Nathaniel a burst of 2 cards. He has so much mana. He's just looking for Nexus of Fate at this point. Or just wants to get a handful of counterspells to make sure that these Wilderness Reclamations never go offline.
Yeah, I mean, he can easily just do this with just Negates and Frilled Mystics for the rest of the game. He doesn't have to go all the way off here.
Right. He's going to be passing the turn here with all of his mana untapped, the ability to activate Arch of Araska, 2 copies of Wilderness Reclamation, a Frilled Mystic as pressure, and a handful of cards. This is going to be a huge uphill battle for Stein.
Yeah, and this is kind of if you're on Stein's side, this is kind of a dispiriting game here because you can't complain about the draw. Your mana came in online all on time. You drew a bunch of sideboard cards, and that Monsees has just answered all this very easily.
Yeah, you want to know my response when you say you can't complain about the draw?
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. Always. You can complain about the opponent's draw. It was so good. He hit land. That's not fair.
Right. Don't let anyone ever tell you that you're not allowed to complain.
Right. Second Frilled Mystic is going to take care of the Thought Erasure. Crushing Canopy going to knock off that Thief of Sanity. Frilled Mystic coming down here is going to really put a lot of pressure on Abraham Stein, as well as just all this large amount of mana generation, as well as activating Arch of Araska over and over and over. Now, some people say, oh, you need to play 4 Search for Escanta in these decks because it's so important. But I say, looky here, Chief. We got Arch of Araska doing a really good Search for Escanta and pressure.
I don't know. I think I'd rather draw 2 than 0 at the end of the day.
What do you mean?
For Search for Escanta. About the do you play 4 or not with it being legendary.
Sure, that's fair.
When this deck, I've watched it a couple times on camera now, when they had Search for Escanta unchecked, it's just easy mode.
That is true. And, I mean, once it just makes Wilderness Reclamation that much better.
And it's not like the second copy is a disaster. It's not good, but it's not like a dead card by any means.
Yeah, and here we have Monsees going off. He's got a free turn floating. Both Wilderness Reclamations have been used. Can generate some more mana, but, kind of out of stuff to do. But he still has a handful of cards and a free turn coming. Attack for 6. All he needs is one more Nexus of Fate, and that's going to do it. Abraham Stein losing Game 2. We're going to have a Game 3 here between Nathaniel Monsees and Abraham Stein.
And interesting there, too. You go back all the way back to the second turn, and it's a choice there for Stein of, do I resolve my Search for Escanta cleanly on turn number 2 and risk Monsees is kind of going off a little bit? And you can understand because Stein played nothing but good reactive cards the whole game. And it still didn't matter. Once Monsees was able to jump in front there on mana and get Wilderness Reclamation on the battlefield, Stein playing a good answer every single turn was not enough to keep up.
All right. Well, you can join us here in the booth this weekend. If you hit the subscribe button here on Twitch, you're going to get to decide the quarterfinal match. I cannot emphasize how cool that is. You get to pick. All the subs get a vote. We take basically like a 30-minute break there while we set up the feature match area. Nick Miller gets everything situated, and y'all get to pick. It's awesome. Not only that, you get a host of custom emoticons and badges, including Roll Todd, which is me just making a big old laughing face. It's busted. Yeah, it's the best emote by a lot.
I don't know if Disgruntled Disheveled Me is still available among the emoticons, but it was once upon a time.
I think we may have a Head and Hands Ross.
Yep.
That one's pretty good. I know we have Techno Brad because at one point we had a malfunction and things just went off. But a lot of cool emoticons and as well as badges if you're a subscriber. It's only $4.99 a month. You also don't have to watch commercials. So that's a plus.
And also, if you are an Amazon Prime member, you get one free subscription to anything. It could be us. Yep. And it should be us. Who else would you give it to? Who else? Just know.
Say that, but then there's a guy right here who streams. So
yeah, and
you could give it to me, too.
Yeah, but
Or you can give it to my boss who's sitting right next to me and really wants me to push this.
Twitch.tv/SCG Tour. Subscribe today. Join the feature match area. Decide the quarterfinals. Custom emoticons and badges. And the $5 of the free subscription you just waste somewhere else. So subscribe today, right now.
Yes, do it.
Quarterfinal is going to be in some hours. Hours away.
Do not make me go Shia LaBeouf on you. Just do it.
Just do it. Just do it.
Game 3 here between Abe Stein and Nathaniel Monsees. If you want to see some content by Mr. Abe Stein, you can check out his articles every Wednesday on StarCityGames.com Select. This week he wrote about this Esper Control deck, off to a 9-2 start. Game 3 here against Nathaniel Monsees' Simic Nexus deck. I'm curious if he can take it down. We saw him sideboard in the Thief of Sanities, right? He has a bunch of Duresses as well to go along with the Thought Erasers. Negates, a lot of counter spells. Is being reactive in this matchup enough? Or does he really need something like Thief of Sanity to really hammer home all of these reactive spells?
Well, I think that if you can manage Search for Azcanta and Wilderness Reclamation, that one-for-one strategy works very effectively. Those two cards break it open, either because Monsees is going to draw too many extra cards with too much selection, or he's going to have too much mana to work with, and he's able to overwhelm your one answer per turn. So that's where the burden is on Stein. If you can keep Wilderness Reclamation off the battlefield, keep Search for Azcanta off the battlefield, I think the Absorbs and Mortifies and such should be able to carry today. But if any of those cards sneak in, I think Stein's game plan doesn't function all that well.
Yeah, Stein here looks like he's on a mulligan to 6 and not super happy with this 6. It's not a look of a man who thinks that this is a good hand.
And it's really painful to mulligan in matchups where your sideboard is all about trading one-for-one.
Right. He's going to really need something like a turn 3 Thief Sanity. He decides to keep taking a scry, look at the top, decides to put it on bottom. Here we go. Turn 1 here for Abraham Stein. Going to lead off with an Isolated Chapel. Not an ideal start because it means your Glacial Fortresses and such are also going to enter the battlefield tapped, but not a huge problem in this matchup. There's always plenty of time. Turn 2 Duress here from Abe Stein. Shows a hand of Crushing Canopy, Negate, Chemist's Insight, 2 copies of Growth Spiral, and 1 copy of Nexus of Fate. Not nearly as terrifying a hand as we saw last game.
Especially no green mana on Monsees' side. This hand doesn't really do very much of anything, but could get fairly explosive if Monsees draws green mana basically right now.
Right, and those Growth Spirals could lead to some serious ramping capabilities. We see Abraham Stein use that duress and take care of Crushing Canopy because he has the card, the sideboard card, Thief of Sanity, that's really going to hammer home. And even though he mulligan, he's in a really good spot here.
Yeah, he's going to be able to recoup this very easily. And you know, as we know about Monsees' hand, it's really just not functional without green mana.
I don't know if you saw that little flick of the 3 cards there. I think now Nathaniel Monsees might be a blackjack dealer.
That was a very smooth,
yes,
very smooth.
2 cards go to the graveyard, one of which is a Chemist's Insight. Notably, the Thief's Sanity does put those in the graveyard instead of exiling them permanently. And, you know, Abraham choosing to keep that card over the Chemist's, even though it gave Nathaniel essentially a free card.
Right, but if you take the Chemisters, then it ends up in the graveyard at some point down the line anyway.
Right.
If you find something high leverage here, particularly Negate or Frilled Mystic, I still think that's better than worrying about the Chemisters Insight.
And he finds a Crushing Canopy here, which could be crushing Nathaniel's hopes in this game. Even if he's able to find his copies of Wilderness Reclamation, it's going to be really tough to get out of this one. Thought Eraser here from Stein, the follow-up. Everything firing off here. Abe able to come back from that mulligan, and looking pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, from Stein's perspective, the shields just might be up for the remainder of the game. If you can keep up a counterspell here, win the fight over Wilderness Reclamation, it's not clear what Monsees' path is to manage Thief of Sanity.
Yeah, I mean, his hand here is a little mopey. 2 copies of Growth Spiral, 2 copies of Negate, Nexus of Fate, and a Chemisters Insight. These are all cards that desperately want you to have a bunch more mana on the battlefield. But with that Chemisters Insight, being able to pitch one of these cards, anything can happen over the next few turns. And it looks like Abraham Stein just doesn't have access to blue mana right now. With that said, if there's a Negate hiding underneath that Thief of Sanity, it can be cast for non-blue mana.
Yep.
Abe in the tank here, trying to figure out what to cast or what to take with this Thought Erasure. In my opinion, not a lot of the cards in Nathaniel's hand matter. I think the cards you probably want to take the most, is the Chemisters Insight, because the game is going to go on for multiple turns from now, and it's one of the easiest ways for him to turn his functional or non-functional hand into a functional hand.
Yeah, if there's no hole to poke in the hand, if it's all basically the same stuff, then the most threatening card is the draw 2.
Right. And even though they can be cast from the graveyard thanks to that powerful jumpstart mechanic here, we're going to see just whether or not Nathaniel Moses can come back from this pretty weak start.
Yeah, it took him a little while here to get off the ground, missing the green mana. And now he's got to play catch-up against an opponent who's hitting with a Thief and probably has a wall of good reactive stuff ready to go.
Right, but Abe is not out of the woods yet. He desperately needs some more blue mana to be able to unlock things like Absorb, or even just 2 counter spells in the same turn. He's looking at top 3 cards here with that Thief of Sanity. Looks like it's a Growth Spiral, Wilderness Reclamation, and a land. Chooses to keep the Growth Spiral under there. End of Abe's turn. Growth Spiral from Nathaniel. Gonna find that land, which allows him to hit the 4th mana and cast that Chemisters Insight. A 3rd one found from the previous Chemisters on the last turn.
I mean, this is the path here for Nathaniel is get enough mana where you can try to do multiple things in one turn. You have some reason for optimism that it could happen because, as you mentioned, Stein's just on a single blue mana, so he can cast Negate. He can cast whatever he has down there from the Thief, but you might be able to push through 2 spells in one turn.
Right, and Nathaniel here recognizes that he needs to find that window, and with Nexus of Fate in hand, he can use that kind of like a bait spell on the end of Abraham's turn. He can go for Nexus of Fate, but he can also go for it at the end of his own turn. A Negate here from Abraham's time, though, is going to eliminate that possibility, and Abe gets to use effectively all of his mana on Nathaniel's instep, and that's exactly where you want to be as a control deck.
And it's really critical there that he got to productively spend his lone blue mana.
Right.
You have to be concerned here if you're in Spine's spot of just being able to cast all of your blue spells in a viable time frame. So those spots where you get to efficiently spend your single blue mana, that it doesn't look like much, but that's a big win for Stein.
No, I absolutely agree. Almost to the point where I'm curious if that was a potential misstep from Monsees. If he had just waited until Abraham's instep, it's possible Abe doesn't draw a second blue mana, and he gets to basically bait that Negate out of his hand and gets to untap with effectively a free turn where the shields are down.
Right. That's my if I'm in Nathaniel's position, what I value the most is just do 2 things.
Yep.
And you can do it over the course of Stein's end of turn into your own turn, but letting him spend his mana efficiently there I think is a big loss.
Well, we got 8 mana here from Nathaniel Monsees. If he has a Wilderness Reclamation, he could go Reclamation and have double Negate backup, but doesn't have the Wilderness Reclamation. Plays the Hinterland Harbor, passes the turn. Abe Stein coming in again with Thief of Sanity. We're going to take a look. And the bottleneck here for Stein for so long was the second blue mana and mana overall. He's found that Hallowed Fountain here, and he has 4 cards still underneath Thief of Sanity.
And you saw instantaneously Stein play that Hallowed Fountain untapped.
Right.
I mean, you can tell that second blue mana probably unlocks a great deal of his hand.
Yeah, Chemister's Insight, the cast here from Monsees, as well as a jump start. And he is flush with cards now. His hand a completely different texture than it was just a few turns ago when Stein cast that Thought Erasure. Plays Arch Vraska for the turn as his land follows that with a Search for Escanta. We're going to see if Nathaniel Monsees can really get something going in this face of so much card advantage from Abraham Stein.
Yeah, the critical, or not necessarily critical, but a small part of this is I believe if the Search for Escanta resolves, it does get Nathaniel to the city's blessing. But, how much time does he really have to leverage Arch if he's about to be run down by the Thief of Sanity? We'll find out. Right.
I mean, this Thief of Sanity has done so much work already. I can't imagine that the cards underneath the Thief of Sanity are bad. I know there's at least a Crushing Canopy. We see here is a Negate. And now Nathaniel has to think, do I even want to fight over this? And he feels like Search for Escanta is powerful enough that he needs to win this battle. Negate is still on the stack. Search for Escanta is still on the stack. Abe trying to figure out. It looks like he let it resolve. That's the city's blessing for Arch of Vraska. This is where it starts. This is how you get back into the game. There's a Crushing Canopy from underneath the Thief of Sanity targeting that Search for Escanta. Monsees with a Frilled Mystic to protect.
Bit of a win here for Stein to at least be able to use his mana here. His mana's kind of been wasted over the last couple of turns. Even though Nathaniel was able to effectively fight back, you at least got to do two things.
Yep. And here we see Stein continually connecting with that Thief of Sanity, gets a free card off the top of Nathaniel's deck every turn, and it's such a powerful effect after sideboard when both decks are kind of honed to interact with each other in basically the same ways.
Yep.
Crushing Canopy, a pretty sweet modal spell that Abe can steal off of the top of Nathaniel's deck, acting as a way to kill Search for Escanta, as well as Wilderness Reclamation and even Hydroid Krasis.
Yep, no end of flyers and enchantments on both sides of the table here.
Yeah. Nathaniel takes a look at the top card, decides to keep it, still is able to transform that Escanta, the Sunken Ruin. Attack for 3.
And now, Nathaniel does get to basically get an activation of Arch plus Escanta with no additional help. He is at risk here of being just run down. I mean, he's going to 6 and about to fall to 4 here. So he doesn't have all the time in the world to leverage these extra cards, but he's going to start drawing quite a bit more now that his 2 lands are available to him.
Yeah, for this entire game, Abraham Stein's bottleneck has been mana. He's been flush with cards thanks to this is the 6th hit with a Thief of Sanity, along with that shock from Nathaniel, or maybe 7th hit with a Thief of Sanity is cast a Negate, Crushing Canopy, I believe another card, just getting so much raw card advantage from the Thief of Sanity and card selection, and just was a little short on blue mana early. He's got himself in the driver's seat now, but with so much mana and card advantage from Nathaniel's side, things could fall apart here quickly.
Yeah, we're going to find. I mean, this is something you now at this point you have to start fighting over the extra turns here because Monsees can convert them into so many extra cards through Escanta and Arch that earlier as a test spell when he's on 7 mana and doesn't have anything going on, maybe you can let it go. But at this point, that Nexus of Fate it translates into a lot of extra cards with a lot of extra selection.
Right.
So you got to start picking your fights here.
Yeah, on top of that, though, casting it during Abraham's instep means that he's going to get to go 2 turns back-to-back, basically unfettered. And if that's the case, if he wins this fight with Negate and perhaps a second Negate from hand, he's going to get 2 full turns where he has access to Escanta the Sunken Ruin, Arch of Vraska, and if he has something like Wilderness Reclamation, all that effectively doubles. Abraham Stein casts Negate off of the Thief of Sanity, targeting the Nexus of Fate. Nathaniel fires back with a Negate of his own. Let's see if he wins. Looks like Abraham Stein is content to let him win that fight.
And another thing that's worth noting here, that Thief of Sanity has connected so many times that Monsees does not have a whole lot of cards left in his deck. That means that Escanta the Sunken Ruin is very likely to find Nexus of Fate because his deck is becoming, as a percentage of the deck, Nexus of Fate just keeps going up and up.
Right, and it looks like he did find it, and he's going to cast one here on his main phase. And then he still has access to activating the Search for Escanta, and with that Frilled Mystic as pressure, attacking for 3 every turn, he doesn't need the Wilderness Reclamation. He can just go Nexus, 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 and just beat down 4 more times with that Frilled Mystic.
This is really bad news. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that Stein has nothing to stop any of this, but if that's the case, I think it's very likely that with the amount of mana available, Monsees can simply go take an extra turn, Escanta, And between the Azcanta and his draw step, has a really good shot of just continuing to find Nexus of Fate.
Yeah, it looks like he found a Wilderness Reclamation as well, and he still has a turn floating. Remember, he did cast that Nexus of Fate on end step. Then he untapped and cast another Nexus of Fate. This is not even the extra turn. This is still his normal turn. And he found a Wilderness Reclamation. He's going to cast that, and alongside so much mana with that Search for Azcanta, could be devastating.
So turns out that Stein actually was holding up something reactive here. He's going to play the Frilled Mystic through the Thief of Sanity.
Wow, and he plays Frilled Mystic off the Thief of Sanity, but a second copy of Wilderness Reclamation here is going to allow Nathaniel to steal this game from Abe. Abe was so far ahead, but he finds another Nexus of Fate off the top. He still has a turn floating. And he returns it to his hand, and that's going to be it. Abraham Stein defeated here, 2-1. Nathaniel Monsees goes on to 10-2.
I mean, that was quite the display there. It looked like Stein was